Welcome to Graveyard Tales channel. Are you ready to feel the fear? Story number 1. Three Girls. The Three Girls is a scary ghost story about a taxi driver who is out working when he picks up some strange customers by the side of the road. One evening, a taxi driver was driving through the city when he spotted three girls standing by the side of the road, with their hands raised. They were trying to flag him down. It had been a quiet night and business was slow, so he was glad to have some customers. The taxi driver pulled over and stopped to pick them up. "Where are you girls going?" he asked as they jumped into the back seat. They told him they needed to go to the hospital. One of the girls had a pain in her stomach and she wanted to see a doctor. The taxi driver glanced at the girl and noticed that she was doubled over in pain. Her face was very pale and she was crying. The taxi driver realized it was an emergency, so he drove as fast as he could to the nearest hospital. When they arrived, the taxi driver looked back and saw that the girl was now extremely sick. She was sweating profusely and moaning in agony. The other girls told him they wanted to stay with their friend and begged him to go inside and fetch a doctor. The taxi driver nodded his head and ran over to the hospital's front desk. He found a nurse and told her that he had a very sick girl in his car. He asked her if she could go out have a look at her to make sure she was all right. The nurse agreed and went out to where the taxi was parked, leaving the taxi driver waiting at the front desk. A few minutes later, the nurse came running back to the front desk, her face red. "What's going on?" she demanded. The taxi driver had no idea what she was talking about. "What did you do to those girls?" cried the nurse. "What do you mean?" asked the bewildered taxi driver. "I've already called the police," said the nurse. "You better stay here until they arrive. Maybe you can explain to them why you have 3 dead bodies in your car." According to the nurse, 3 college girls had been driving in the area when they had a terrible accident. They were trapped in the burning wreckage, and when the ambulance brought them to hospital, there was little the doctors could do for them. In spite of all their efforts, all 3 of the girls died. Their bodies had been placed in the hospital mortuary. However, the dead bodies in the taxi were unmistakably those of the 3 college girls. "What were you trying to do by stealing the bodies from our hospital?" the furious nurse demanded to know. "I assure you," replied the shaken taxi driver, "when I picked those girls up, they were very much alive." Needless to say, the place where the taxi driver picked up the girls was the exact same place where the accident had happened and the girls were burned alive. Story number 2. Children on the Bus. The Children on the Bus is a spooky tale from Japan about a man who overhears an intriguing conversation while he is traveling home from work one evening. It was late in the evening and a man was on his way home from work. He thought he was the only passenger on the bus, but then he heard children's voices coming from behind him. As he listened to their conversation, he was intrigued. The 2 young boys were apparently talking about a ghost story. "And if you turn around, the ghost will snatch you away and carry you off to the afterworld," he heard one of them say. The man recognized the boy's voice. He had often seen the kids on the same bus when he traveled home from work every day. They attended a school nearby. The other boy was saying, "That's easy. Then, all you have to do is make sure you don't turn around." "Yeah," replied the first boy. "But the thing is, you can't help but turn around. The ghost will try all sorts of tricks to get you turn around." The man realized that they were getting close to the stop where the 2 boys usually got off. However, it looked like they didn't notice it. When the bus stopped, the kids were still talking. The man thought he should warn them that they were missing their stop, so he turned around. The man was never seen again. Story number 3. Bloody Laundry. Bloody Laundry is a scary story about 3 girls who encounter a ghost from Scottish folklore called the Bean Nye. They say that anyone who sees her is doomed to die. It is based on a story submitted by Toddy123 and an old ghost story by Dorothy K. Haynes titled The Bean Nye. There were 3 girls named Taylor, Susan, and Jamie. One cold winter evening, they were walking home from school together when they decided to take a shortcut through the woods. It was raining and the girls huddled together under an umbrella. The path they took followed a crooked stream that ran through the woods. The light was quickly fading and a fine mist settled over everything. The woods were eerily silent and, In the gloom, the branches of the trees looked like gnarled claws reaching out to grab them. All of a sudden, the girls spotted something that made them stop in their tracks. Up ahead, they saw a figure crouched at the edge of the stream. When they went closer, they realized it was a woman. She was bending over and washing her clothes in the water. The woman was creepy looking. She wore a ragged gray shawl and her long black hair hung down over her face. The clothes she was washing were stained with blood and the water in the stream was running red. The girls gasped in horror at the shocking sight and they ran off, stumbling over roots and branches and tree stumps, until they finally reached Jamie's house. The terrified girls told Jamie's mother what they had seen. "That sounds like the Bean Nye," Jamie's mother said. "My grandparents told me about her when I was just a child. They say she washes the funeral shrouds of those who are about to die. It's an omen of death." "What?" cried Jamie. "If you see her, does it mean you're going to die?" "I don't know," her mother replied. "All I know is that it's bad luck to set eyes on her." The three girls flew into a panic and Jamie's mother tried to calm them down. "The Bean Nye is just an old ghost story," she said. "She's not real. It's nothing but an old superstition. Years ago, people used to believe in it, but not nowadays. I'm sure what you saw was just some poor old woman who can't afford a washing machine." Despite what Jamie's mother said, the girls were still nervous. Taylor decided to go home and Susan decided to spend the night at Jamie's house to keep her company. That night, the wind rose up and a heavy snow began to fall. All night long, the house was rocked by the breeze and Susan and Jamie barely got a wink of sleep. When they woke up the next morning and looked out the window, everything was covered in a blanket of snow. School was canceled, but Jamie's parents still had to go to work. The two girls were left at home on their own. Shortly after breakfast, they tried to give Taylor a call and invite her over, but when they called her mobile, there was no answer. Susan and Jamie were worried, so they went over to Taylor's house and knocked on the door. Taylor's mother answered the door. Her eyes were red and her face was streaked with tears. "Taylor didn't come home last night," she sobbed. "The police searched the woods this morning and they found her, or what was left of her. She had been chopped up into pieces and her body parts were floating in the stream." Taylor's mother was too upset to say anything more and she slammed the door. Susan and Jamie were scared out of their wits. It seemed as if the legend about the Bean Nye was coming true. They raced back to Jamie's house and they were afraid to go outside for the rest of the day. They sat together in Jamie's bedroom, talking about Taylor and trying to convince themselves it was just a coincidence. All of a sudden, the power went out and the girls were plunged into darkness. Susan and Jamie clung to each other, shaking with fear. They waited and waited, but nothing happened. Eventually, they both let out a sigh of relief. "I was sure that was the Bean Nye coming to kill us," Jamie laughed. "Me too," Susan chuckled. The girls were hungry, so they decided to go downstairs to the kitchen and fix themselves a snack. Jamie lit some candles and placed them on the table to give them some light. It was pitch black outside and her parents wouldn't be home for hours. The girls raided the cupboards and made themselves some peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. As they were eating, Susan suddenly began to make a gagging sound. Her eyes grew wide and her hands clawed at her throat. She was choking. Jamie flew into a panic as she tried to help her friend. Susan was coughing and spluttering and her face was turning bright red. She fell to the ground and stopped breathing. Jamie didn't know what to do. She screamed and pounded on Susan's chest, but it was no good. The girl was dead. Jamie just sat there on the floor, covering her face with her hands and crying uncontrollably. She looked down at her friend. Susan's face was purple and twisted in a grotesque grimace. Her lips were blue and her tongue was thrust out. It was a disgusting sight. Jamie couldn't bear to look at her any longer, so she got a blanket and draped it over her friend's corpse. She ran to the phone and tried to call her parents, but there was no dial tone. The lines must be down, she thought. She took out her mobile, but there was no reception. In desperation, Jamie ran out of the house and went to try and get help. It was freezing cold outside and the night was as black as pitch. She trudged through the snow, shivering and shaking, but she got disoriented and didn't know where she was going. Her teeth were chattering and she felt like she was going to freeze to death. Eventually, she was forced to turn back. She managed to make it back to her house, and when she got back inside safe and sound, she breathed a sigh of relief. She set about warming herself up, rubbing her arms and legs to get the circulation going again. Jamie was afraid she would get sick, so she went searching for some medicine. She stumbled down the darkened hallway and made her way to the bathroom. Rummaging through the shelves in the dim light, she found a bottle, opened it and gulped down the contents. All of a sudden, she began coughing and spluttering. A horrible pain shot through her whole body. She felt like her throat was burning. Her stomach felt like it was being torn apart from the inside. The room began to spin and she fell to the ground, writhing around in excruciating pain. Just then, the lights came back on. Jamie looked down at the bottle she was holding in her hand. Through her blurred vision, she could just about make out the label. To her horror, she realized that what she drank wasn't cough syrup at all. It was bleach.